This is the Freeheel Life Podcast, episode number 152. I'm your host, Josh Madsen, coming at you from the Freeheel Life shop in Salt Lake City, Utah. And welcome back, my friends and family of the turn. We got snow here in Salt Lake City. So pumped. They measured, I think, probably around 19 inches, probably a little bit more by the time this comes out, up Little Cottonwood Canyon, which for those of you who do not know or are familiar with that is where Alta Snowbird is located. And then we've got Big Cottonwood next to it with Brighton and Solitude and many other ski areas I'm seeing with snow on the ground. So it is officially here, and we can talk more about actually skiing in the coming months instead of just summer stuff. So psyched to be back this Monday. Hope you all are enjoying your morning or afternoon or evening whenever you're checking this out, and starting the week off right. So just wanted to start off with some newsroom and notes. We opened the shop last week for a few additional days, and we will be doing the same this week. So you can find us Thursday from noon until 7, Friday noon to 7, and 10 a.m. until 4 p.m. on Saturday. Always available during the week at customer service at freeheellife.com. And that is a great way for us to get in touch with you directly. So if you need anything, either hit us up online or come in during those hours. We are taking in mounts, ski tunes, tech shops running, and we're super psyched about that. Good to have the blood flowing again, and welcome on the 8th season of the Freeheel Life retail shop. And we're having a lot of fun and looking forward to another fine winter here in North America. Okay, so wanted to bring a few things up on the content side of the house. This past week, we put up a couple new videos on the YouTube channel. Please like and subscribe over there. Become a subscriber. That's a great way to get information, and that's a platform where we are going to be putting the majority of our video content. Obviously, if you're over on Instagram or Facebook, kind of all ends up getting somewhere, and obviously on the website as well. But we want to make sure, if you're not a YouTube user or you are a YouTube user, to go over and subscribe to the channel. Freeheel Life channel is where it's at for everything Telemark related, with our business, events we're involved with, and tackling some hard questions. So this past week, we wanted to put up a video about, it's titled, "My G3 Target is Broken, What Do I Do?" Taylor did a great job giving an overview of the G3 Target binding, and sort of now that parts are virtually non-existent except for on the used market, they're out of manufacturing, sort of what are some options moving forward, whether you're going to stay within the 75 millimeter realm or move to NTN. And really, you know, and a lot of these videos for us, they're service oriented and they're spurred on by the experiences that we're having with customers. As you can imagine, some listeners out there, you may even be scoffing at that name of that video yourself. And that's what I found most interesting, and threw up another video sort of in response to some of the comments on the Target video called "Why are Telemark skiers so cheap? They are ruining everything." And honestly, the title of that particular video was sort of fun because that is not my opinion, but rather it was sort of the overarching theme of a lot of responses to the Target video, which I thought was funny, and took a second to kind of debunk some of the myths around Telemark skiers, how much money they spend, will they spend money, if they aren't spending money, why are they not spending money, how that affects research and development, people getting into the market in terms of starting businesses or businesses that exist already, expanding their offerings, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I had a fun time doing that video. I'll probably do more. Honestly, it was sort of like a short podcast almost, except I was sitting at my desk at the office, and it was a good time. So I did get one comment that was specifically about just it being a video format. And definitely that's kind of where I would like to head with the podcast in 2023. So we're taking some steps in order to get there as well, because I also would like to do that going into, I think we're 3 years into this thing. So it's time for video. Had I tried that at the beginning, I didn't have the resources to really be consistent on a weekly basis, just because video obviously takes a lot more to produce. But anyways, thought I'd tease that out there a little bit about maybe some video podcasts in the future. We'll see how that goes. But going back to the YouTube stuff, check that out. I would love your comments on it if you are a podcast listener and haven't checked out the YouTube videos. I like the response that I got on that response video as well. Fun to hear people's thoughts. And obviously I'm giving my take, my perspective based on my experiences and in the telemark space for 20 some years in a lot of different aspects. So hopefully I'm bringing a good nuanced viewpoint that maybe is a little bit different. Because sometimes what I realize is there are a lot of loud voices from a very small group of people, and they kind of just beat the same drum over and over again. And I'm kind of sick of it personally. So I'm throwing my hat in the ring, and want to make sure that I'm bringing you the best, most informative information about Telemark and all that fun stuff. And obviously running a brand like Freeheel Life, we are, I'm bringing maybe a little business spin to it, which is okay too. But I like to bring the history into it. I like to bring case studies. I like to bring all that stuff. If you listen to the podcast, you know that. But yep. So we are pumping videos out. We got a bunch of fun stuff that we're kind of getting back on this week. So stay tuned to the YouTube channel, YouTube/Freeheel Life. Get some, and can't wait to get some ski footage going, but we got to wait for a little more snow before we get too crazy on that. Okay, so today I actually got a nice email from a gentleman named Rory who submitted a couple ideas for the podcast, and I wanted to take a stab at one of these and thought it was appropriate for the time of year. He had suggested doing setup upgrade ideas for individual gear setups, either personal or listener submitted, and suggested improvements for a given desired turn or skill level. So I'm going to kind of, I'm obviously not going to do listener submitted ones on this one. I'm just going to kind of take a stab at this on my own. And, but yeah, this could be a fun one to maybe do down the road as well. And definitely love getting these emails from everyone. I know I say this over and over, it gets busy. Sometimes I don't email back, but I usually throw them in a mailbag episode or respond directly to this particular one. So shout out to Rory. Thank you for being a listener and sending this sweet idea, which I think is an awesome thing to think of as we're heading into another fantastic powder season in North America. So there's a couple different ways that we could look at this idea for a setup upgrade. I think the first thing that came to my mind was sort of like modifications that you could do. And then there's also obviously upgrading your gear. And that's always nice when you can do the whole thing. So I'm probably just going to kind of bounce around with a couple ideas between things, and wanted to start off kind of with some simple boot modifications, and kind of start with boots, then go into bindings, and then talk a little bit about skis. But that way we can kind of go over some upgrade ideas that I like to see, and maybe things that you haven't thought of in the past that might actually improve performance or might give you a little bit better fit or anything like that. So with the boots, the first things that come to my mind when boots come up is how old are the boots, and then what kind of things can you do to maintain the boot to keep them vibrant and working correctly, and maybe even put some more life into them. So that's something super important. So if you listened to a couple episodes ago, when I did the how to select used gear, and I kind of went through the scenarios that we use when we're looking for used equipment or someone brings consignment items in. That's a good reference point if you're maybe looking to do an inspection on your boots, skis, or bindings before the season starts, and kind of identify any problems that might be there. And it's pretty simple. I mean, the basic idea of it is, sort of starting from the toe, working to the heel, looking at the sole, and moving all the way up through the cuff, and sort of identifying what's going on. So with boots, I'm going to kind of talk more about things that you can modify. That's kind of the first thing that comes to my mind. And one of the very easy things that can add some extra strength, if you will, to the cuff of the boot is adding a booster strap. So for those that aren't familiar with a booster strap, it's basically a aftermarket. In most cases, there have been some models actually of like the T-Race from Scarpa back in the day and early TX Comp that had a booster strap. But most of the time on our Telemark boots, if you've got a 4-buckle boot or even a 3-buckle, most of the time there's a strap on the top of the boot that's just Velcro. It's just, a piece of webbing with Velcro on the back, and it kind of turns back on itself, and you put the Velcro down and you're good to go. And the idea of having that is just to give that added support on the shin and kind of, keep that boot close to the shin, which is where you're driving a lot of the power in the turn. So a booster strap is sort of this, it's an upgraded version of that. It's got a buckle rather than the Velcro, and kind of an elastic section to it, and a little bit wider in a lot of cases. But why someone might want to get a set of booster straps is maybe you're looking for a little more power in the boot. It's not necessarily making the boot cuff stiffer, but it's cinching that boot closer to the shin, and it's allowing you to drive more power. So for those that like more of maybe a race performance out of their boot, that's something that you could do. And honestly, it's good for most people, unless you're someone who just really likes that loose upper part of the boot. Again, this is all personal preference, right? I don't, for many, it's funny because I'm thinking even back probably 5 years ago, there was a little section of time where I only did my bottom 2 buckles of my boots on a 4-buckle boot and kept the top loose. I've kind of gone away from that now, but that was something that for whatever reason, I just started liking more movement in the sort of shin calf section of the boot, and kind of went with that. I kind of went away from it the last couple of years just to get a little more performance, and kind of almost as a safety factor, because some days when I'm charging really hard, I don't like having that. I don't want any ankle movement or any foot movement of the matter, just because I kind of feel like there's some ability to injure my foot inside of the boot if there's too much slop in there. But boots are a funny thing. So like I said, it's all personal preference, and I always love hearing everyone, from people that ski in walk mode or ski mode. These are all preferences that people have that just help them enjoy the Telemark turns. So booster strap, I think that's a good way to do it. So as we're kind of moving down that section of the boot, another thing you could do, let's say your boots are getting a little bit worn down. I'm going to talk about NTN specifically because I know there's the ability to do what I'm about to say a little easier with a new replacement part. It might get a little harder elsewhere. So on a Scarpa boot, I'll specifically talk about those, TX Comp, TX Pro, women's TX Pro, the TX even. The tongue of the boot that's part of the plastic section, those are actually replaceable. So if your boots are kind of starting to get a little mushy and maybe you want to add a little bit of vibrancy to them, kind of up, sort of bring them back to life, at least in that section of the boot, you can purchase from us the replacement tongues for those Scarpa boots. I think we may even have some T1 tongues available as well. But these can get worn down on the inside. They kind of have the bellow guard as part of that, which is kind of the inside portion that kind of keeps your skis from cutting up the inside of the bellows on the ski. So that's another thing. If they're wearing down to the point where they're starting to cut the bellows on the inside of your feet, that's not a good thing. So, but that is a nice upgrade to kind of, if you're trying to get a little more life out of your boot, you can replace those. Now, another upgrade too is like, some of the guys at the shop have taken the TX Pro, for instance, and maybe put like a TX Comp tongue on there to kind of mix and match. So you get some kind of different variations of stiffness throughout the boot. And it's kind of nice that you have that ability to do that. Honestly, if you ever hear me talk about boots and maybe what they look like in the future, I mean, this is definitely one of my wants, is both from like a personal side, but also from a retail side. I would love to see more boot variations available from a manufacturer. We've kind of always been on this program since I opened up in 2014. We've always had a lot of new parts that are still manufactured and used parts so that people could access this stuff and kind of mix and match, not only just to repair your equipment, but for instance, like us carrying the tongues, it's very unlikely that you can find those tongues for sale anywhere else. And, we started doing that years ago, and I think it's really gotten us thinking, like, how cool would that be if you bought like a stock boot and then you've sort of got all these like modification options, like the tongue, how stiff it is. I mean, obviously people do stiffer liners or moldable liners, all that kind of stuff as well, booster straps. But I think there's a need where you can add a lot of these. Well, I shouldn't need anything needed in ski. You need skis, boots, and bindings, but modifications are not necessarily needed, but it's kind of a fun aspect of equipment, right? Fiddling around with stuff and changing things up. So, okay, so we talked booster straps, the tongue portion of the boot. Those are good. If maybe you've got a more obscure boot that you're just trying to kind of keep it going for a while, and you're just not quite ready to give it up and buy the new boot. You might be able to find a used pair. We found a used pair of T1 Bumblebee T1s from the early 2000s the other day, literally mint condition. I mean, I was blown away. I was like, whose closet were these sitting in? I mean, they were perfect, and my size too. I did not keep those, unfortunately. I probably should have. I don't think I have that boot. Not one of my favorite of the eras. There was better T1s, if you will, but a fine vintage nonetheless. So, okay. So that's kind of, those were my first two things, in terms of booster strap, tongue replacements. And, then kind of the next thing I was thinking, that in Scarpa is a good ad, if you can find it, is, and I'll give a shout out to Telly Tay on this one, because he was really the first one I remember doing this. Is there is a aluminum block, it's called a power block, that you can replace on the back of the T. Well, I guess there's a couple variations. There's an NTN version, but like on a TX Comp, for instance, these power blocks did exist because they came stock on the boot at the beginning when they first put that boot out, and with a booster strap nonetheless. And then they went away from it. So a lot of these mods almost kind of existed at one point, and they just, for whatever reason, Scarpa didn't stick with it on the version that they kept putting out, and they kind of went away from it. But if you're Telly Tay, old Taylor Johnson, he showed me this because he wanted a stiffer boot back in the day. And so what he was doing was taking a TX Comp NTN boot, and he would take the ski walk mechanism off and put the power block in, which keeps the cuff at an angle permanently. So it takes any little slop out of that cuff in a really cool way. And then adding that booster strap even gives a more stiffer performance sensation. So those are kind of three things that you could do on the boot side of things to sort of improve performance and kind of even just give a different, there's kind of the performance aspect. Like I said, there's maybe giving more life to your boot aspect if the cost of it makes sense. And some of them are just kind of fun little mods that you can do just to try them out. As far as like gear improvements, setup upgrade in the boot. I mean, we talk about this all the time, but when you're ready for a new boot, go to an NTN boot. Assuming that, and I am fully aware that if you have a size 31 or 32, that is not available. Whole podcast in and of itself, we don't need to talk about it right now, but I hear you out there, and I know that does not exist. But if let's say you're a size 30 or below, Mondo, if you're ready for a new boot, take the time to give us a call and let's see if we can walk you into the NTN world correctly. Again, understanding where you're coming from. Don't just upgrade to upgrade. That's like literally the dumbest thing I've ever heard. And I always say that, like, if you walk into a retail, if for some reason, if you're not shopping with us, which I hope you at least give us a chance to get your business, I would love that. We always like to at least interview for the job. But if for some reason you're supporting another shop for boots, that's cool. But don't let them sell you the boot just because it's the new thing and that's what you should be on. If you're a Telemark skier, they've got to understand where you're coming from on the boot side and the binding side of the house and the ski side, frankly, in order to get you to the right boot. So that's kind of my 2 cents on upgrading. If you are going to move from 75 and you're ready for boots and they're just clapped out, go to NTN, just because that's the binding platform you're most likely going to see in the future. And I've talked about that. You can go back and listen to like 75 millimeter versus NTN podcast way, way, way back in the day. Like a couple years ago, we had that talk. But yeah, so there's a couple sort of modification upgrades. And then sort of the big upgrade is if you're going to get new boots, I recommend talking to one of us, and we'll walk you through what a good NTN option is for where you're coming from on the 75 millimeter side. Alrighty, so moving into the binding realm of this same topic, there's a couple things with bindings that, depending on where you're at in the binding realm, sometimes there's upgrades, modifications, things of that nature. If you get too old school, what I would call the vintage category, some of that stuff you really can't change too much. I'll kind of start off by saying, in general, in our experience, going into our 8th year, having a retail front for the brand, it's apparent to us that many people don't actually understand their bindings and how they work. And that's cool from like a naivete standpoint. It's sort of like, well, if they're working, right? Like, that's cool. But I've always felt like it's a disservice to the customer if they don't understand all the bells and whistles. Whether they choose to use the bells and whistles is totally up to them. But in a lot of ways, I think people's experience could be improved if they understood what's going on with the binding in terms of how you can change and modify the performance, maybe to even fit your personal style or where your level of skiing, or maybe just the feel. So I'll throw a couple out here that are just popping into my head, which is, let's start. We brought up our favorite binding, the G3 Target. And I'm just going to keep saying that over and over because I know it's just like, it's so cringy for some people. Like, I just say the word Targa and they're like, oh my God, why are you saying that word again? Which I think is kind of funny. But G3 Targa, here's a really interesting one with that. So you had 3 different cartridges that you could choose from. So there was a silver cartridge, a red cartridge, and a green one. And silver, the way you would know is on the top of the cartridge had like a different color, sort of nose to it, like the one end that hooked on to the heel stirrup. So even with that Targa, you had options, right? Like you had the ability to change the stiffness of the spring. Another one so these are sort of like, you could buy these and modify. And so I bring that one up because I don't want to say any, because maybe I'll run into something that does not exist, but let's think about the Volet products, for instance. They have this compression cartridge that's enclosed, and that's a good modification too that you could do. If you're in that 75 world with Volet, let's say you're on a switchback, they come with a stock spring. Most of them now, I think, are sort of this gray on the regular switchback. But check this out. On the X2, which has a more aggressive pivot point, please reference the Volet podcast that I did a few weeks back, and you get the whole lowdown on all this. But the switchback X2 cartridge is a black one and actually is a little stiffer. So technically, if you wanted a less aggressive pivot point over with the regular switchback, but you wanted a stiffer spring, you could get the stiffer springs and put them onto your regular switchback. Is it going to make a huge difference? I don't know, but it's available, and kind of goes in the same vein of like, adding cartridges that are different to your binding to change the stiffness. Now on that, I brought up pivot point versus stiffness of the cartridge. Super dorky Telemark language. I apologize to all the beginners out there. There is a YouTube video, activity versus stiffness, which talks about this pivot point versus stiffness. Go check it out. I know I said subscribe, but there's a lot of good videos if you go digging on there and the playlists and all that. But this kind of leads me to when I said it was kind of a disservice to a lot of people when they bought bindings back in the day, and probably even today, because if the shop salesperson doesn't know how all this stuff works, how the hell are you supposed to know about it, right? It's like a bad game of telephone, and by the end of the linked up conversations, nobody knows what's happening. So the one binding I really started noticing on this, and pivot point comes into this, is the 22 Designs Hammerhead, or even the original Rainy Hammerhead, which is where it started. And anybody who's had a hammerhead binding, Russell Rainey, the inventor of the Super Loop and the hammerhead, had something really special going on, in my opinion, because he really understood the difference between the stiffness of the spring and the pivot position of where the cable actually caught as you go into a drop knee turn, and the relationship between those two things. But without going too much in the rabbit hole on pivot versus stiffness, the hammerhead, for anybody who's had that, it had 5 different positions. So you could change the neutrality or activeness depending on if you move the pivot point towards the toe, then it's more neutral. And if you move it backward, it's more active. And then you could add even a stiffy spring back in the day on the hammerhead. So again, there's your spring stiffness modification. But and this is less of like an upgrade because it's part of the binding, but a lot of people never knew that you could change the position of the hammerhead and achieve a different feeling on the binding itself. And I can't tell you how many conversations I've had with folks over the last 7 years where it's like, they're like, I say, hey, what position are you on your hammerhead? So we make sure to remount it that way or whatever, like it would come up in the conversation. And they're like, what are you talking about? Like, I just ski the binding. It's like, really? Oh, wow. Well, let me show you this. Let me show you what I'm talking about. And then it's like, wow, I had no idea. So, and funny enough, one of the little history tidbits I'll throw in there, Russell Rainey figured this out on the Super Loop. So if you've got an old pair of Super Loops kicking around, you could change the pivot point on those. I mean, we're talking like late 80s, early 90s. He was already figuring this out. Amazing. Seriously cool. One of these days we'll get Russell on the podcast. I have been talking to him, so I'll tease it out there a little bit. We're in the works. Our people are talking. Just kidding. We don't have people, but it's basically me texting him saying, hey, do you want to be on the show? So he said he wants to do it. So I can't wait for this conversation. Anyways, pivot point. So maybe you weren't a hammerhead person, but guess what? That pivot point kept going through the 22 Designs products. And that's something you should mess with if you haven't, on the axle or the vise or the links. I'll say with the links, it doesn't seem to change as much as I would think it would on some of the cable bindings, but hey, it's there and you should know about it. So I think cartridge stuff, just quick little recap to bring us back into focus here. Look at what cartridges or springs are available for the bindings. Okay. And then learn the binding, make sure that the person selling you that binding, or if you pick it up on the used market, you actually understand the components of it, just so you get everything out of it that you want to, that makes me think about two things. So I brought links up. It does have what they call, in 22 Designs language, the slick pin. So you can move that in 3 positions on the links. Now, links this year, which is their Tecto Touring NTN binding, they are offering it in a softer plate too. Again, cool mods, right? Like you could add a softer plate to the links to achieve a different feel. And I love seeing that. I really, really think that's the direction boots and bindings are going to go in the future, is the ability to modify all these different aspects of the bindings, and the consumer has the ability to do it either by adding a stiffer spring aftermarket or just knowing the different features like a slick pin and being able to change that. So also on the NTN side of the house, other things that you can upgrade, like Tecto NTN, the Majo binding. We've been doing some videos on the YouTube channel and Facebook lately about this. And Majo is, Taylor just did a video, I think 2 weeks ago, called 5 Reasons to Buy In Wild Majo. And we really tried to break down Taylor broke down all the pieces of, like, here's our top 5 of why this is a cool binding to buy. And one of them is it's got, if you decide to upgrade to different springs, there's like 20 configurations that are possible on the In Wild Majo. It's awesome. Again, it's this level of customization that is just amazing, because everyone should have that ability. Some people literally are going to buy a Telemark binding and they're going to put it on their feet and they're like, yep, that works. And then they never change it. Okay. But I would encourage, and honestly, I kind of fall in that category. I think a lot of it's like how I grew up skiing. It was like, well, here's what I got. All right, let's go. Plus, you didn't have as many options. I mean, bindings were just, you had a cable binding and that's kind of how you rolled. But I will say it's good to have the knowledge and then make the choice. At least know what is going on and the ability to change stuff, because it might help you in troubleshooting maybe something not feeling correct. You don't have to be a gear nerd in order to know the product and know how to maybe make it work better for you, which is kind of what I'm trying to sort of span both worlds here, in terms of that. Because not everybody is a gear nerd, geek, whatever word you want to use. But good to know what's going on. Okay, we've covered the compression cartridges, spring availability, and the different bindings, both 75 millimeter and NTN, different configurations with like pivot points. And yeah, there's some fun stuff that you can kind of chew on and figure out if there's kind of some mixing and matching that you may want to do at some point. And I think that's a good thing. So kind of going to the macro picture of the whole thing is, if you're looking to upgrade for performance, again, it's hard to answer that question without having a specific example. Okay, so like I said on that YouTube video last week, Taylor did, my G3 Targa is breaking. What should I do next? We gave two options. So if you're looking at that macro view, just like, I need a new binding because this other one's hard to fix now. Targa, if you're going to stay in the 75 millimeter world, the Switchback or the Switchback X2 is a wonderful way to go to kind of achieve a similar performance and feel. If you really wanted to go up, I would suggest something a little more, one of my favorite bindings, that the 22 Designs Axle or the Vice. I feel like that's sort of, in my opinion, the pinnacle of 75 millimeter technology. That's where I would go. Now, if you're looking to do the whole enchilada and move up to the NTN program, then, you know, you're going to be getting new boots and bindings. One of the ones coming from G3 Targa up that's kind of a dark horse, I think, at this point, is the Rotofella Freedom, not the Free Ride, the Freedom. Kind of has a similar feel for like the G3 skier. I have also heard, a lot of people think the Majo has a really natural flex, or maybe more of a 75 millimeter quote unquote flex. So that might be an option as well to look into. But, yeah, I mean, if you're looking to upgrade from that kind of stuff, again, maybe you're on a Hammerhead and you're ready to go NTN. If you're going Hammerhead, you may want to just stick with 22 Designs, go Outlaw X. That's a great option. And I think that's, depending on where you're skiing a Hammerhead, most people are skiing like Hammerhead on position 3, 4, maybe even 5. They're going to have no issue moving over to an Outlaw X. So again, it's a really specific answer depending on where you're coming from on the binding. So when we're looking at the big picture stuff, like what kind of, basically this question that I'm riffing off of is like, what upgrades can you do to yada, yada, yada? Well, it really depends. So hit us up, customer service at freeheellife.com, and we will take you on a spiritual journey of where you're at on what 75 millimeter binding, and we'll either keep you in 75 or we'll take you to the land of NTN. Whatever you choose, and whatever actually is probably the best fit for what you want. But it's going to take a little bit of a Telemark therapy session to get you there, and we're cool with that. So hit us up. We'll schedule a time to call you. We'll spend 15 minutes and get you all dialed in, because that's what we're all about. So let's wrap this puppy up with some skis, why don't we? Skis are a little bit more interesting because skis are more of a quiver thing, right? Like no one ski is really going to do it all. So I'm going to kind of hit on more generalities of stuff. And this one's a lot less, maybe, I don't want to say it's less complicated, but it's really more about having certain skis for certain objectives or certain types of skiing. And, not everybody has the ability to have like 10 pairs of skis or even 3 pairs of skis. They can get expensive. So I think let's start there. Is if you are on an older pair of skis, and when I say older, I'm not talking like I always try to break it down. Like vintage is like old, like we're talking like way old, like 1980s, 1990s. But I'm saying like old, maybe like early to mid 2000s, something that's over 10 years old. Most of it is, I'm thinking traditional camber, and I'm thinking there's a long, effective edge touching the snow. So that's what I'm kind of saying in this example is if, let me use a specific example actually. So last week in the retail front, a gentleman came in and he has a pair of K2 World Pieced. And this is going to make a great example because it's basically heading towards what I want to tell you about. World Pieced. I can't remember the exact measurement underfoot. I would venture to say it's maybe 80 millimeters underfoot, maybe. It's got an effective edge, meaning a lot, when you set it on the ground and push it flat, like most of the ski tip to tail, the edge is in contact with the snow. And then when you put the skis together base to base, there's a lot of camber, meaning sort of, for those that don't know what camber is, it's basically when you put skis together, they're not like usually flat pushing against each other. If there's a lot of camber, there's kind of this, the tip and tail are touching, but there's sort of this pocket, if you will, that's sort of formed naturally because the ski's pressed in a way where it creates sort of that arc. And so when you put the two skis together, that's the camber. So a lot of camber, a lot of effective edge, and kind of narrow underfoot. This is what I mean by older skis. So if this particular gentleman, I mean, this is a good ski. And he's like, I love this ski. He's like, I kind of want to upgrade, but I also like, I want to be careful upgrading, and this is a great example of like, yeah, there's concern. You have fun on these skis, albeit an older pair of skis, but you're worried that you're going to get a new setup and then you're going to get to the hill and all of a sudden you're completely unhappy because you don't really know what you're getting into. Okay. So what we're trying to do is mitigate those issues ahead of time to the best of our ability. So this gentleman basically was walking through them and kind of from a price point perspective and what was available on the wall right now, I took him over to the Volley Ultra Vector, which is honestly one of my favorite Volley skis. I like it a lot. It's similar. It's very similar to what we did with the Protector 95. And basically this is it. Traditional camber, similar to what this older pair of skis this gentleman had, but it's got an early rise tip, meaning it's less effective edge, and a little tail rise. So the reason you want that kind of stuff, if you're looking to upgrade, the biggest thing I can say is go a little fatter. Not huge though. Don't go crazy. I mean, this guy's coming from like 80 or something millimeters underfoot. Let's get to like 90. Let's get to 95 underfoot. That's a great all mountain ski, that for most people, you might even want to go 85 if you're like wanting to carve or whatever. But for this example, I'm talking to him about the Ultra Vector. He lives in Utah. And it'll be a great application for inbounds, out of bounds skiing combination. Okay. Light swing weight and easy to ski. So that's I wanted to use that example because if you're just like on an older pair of ski that I kind of defined and kind of walked through the features, that's the first thing you want to think of is just, early rise tip, traditional camber, and maybe a little extra rise on the tail. Not a lot. And there's a lot of great skis on the market that have those features. I would say the majority of skis are like that on the market. And that's a great option. At least get to that level, but don't go too fat. Don't think you have to go too wide underfoot. It's not necessary, let's take baby steps, but still get a lot out of it. Okay. So that's kind of going to the person that hasn't upgraded yet. And maybe going from like a single quiver ski to like another single ski, like all mountain, sort of like, this is the ski that I'm going to ski, which is very, very typical. Not everybody is a ski bum and has 20 pairs of skis in their closet. That's just not the reality. So if you're going to spend your hard-earned money, those are the features I would look for in a good ski for Telemark skiing. Okay. So maybe on the more specific side, for those of you that are out there that like, hey, I kind of want to upgrade. I've got that ski you're talking about. I've got a protector, from Freeheel Life. I've got a Volet Ultra Vector or Supercharger, which have similar profiles to the protectors. But maybe I want something even more specific, and something that's just like it's a fun add-on to the quiver. This is maybe the one time I'll say, maybe look at like a reverse camber ski or like flat camber, something like that. Something that's got a little more ability to sort of maneuver, and slarve, I think, is the word that often gets used. It's sort of not a slide and not a carve. It's a slarve. So if you're going slarving, a lot of people don't like, a lot of modern skis are kind of like this, where flat camber, reverse camber is a little trickier and very specific, I think, to soft snow. But even like flat camber with a lot more early rise tip and early rise tail, the effective edge essentially is just, you're skiing on a short, even if your ski's 185, you're only skiing that middle section of the ski because you're slarving around. So that's what I would say is if you got some extra cash kicking around, you've got more of that traditional camber early rise tip vibe. Look at getting something kind of fun and playful like that, and, there's definitely a lot of options out there as well. I think a lot of people have kind of landed on, especially if they're maybe soft snow focused type ski brands, you're going to see that type of stuff. And I think that's definitely worthwhile to try out and add to the quiver. The only other kind of quiver add that I think would be fun, I talked about this a while back on a podcast about certain trends that I was seeing, and this kind of plays into it, but having a carving setup and legit, like, go buy a race stock pair of skis or something. Again, I'm speaking to someone who's a more advanced skier. If you're like a beginner, don't go buy race stock skis. That's silly. You're not going to have a very fun time. But, even the beginner or intermediate telemark skier, getting some sort of ski that's a little narrower underfoot with good shape to it, maybe even a flat tail, but something that is definitely meant more for carving. I'm thinking there's all sorts of these skis on the market. And, I think that's a fun quiver add as well. And something that can really help because, despite what we all see on the internet, it's not bluebird, sunny, and 3 feet of pow every day. Sometimes it's icy or maybe even a nice groomer morning. I mean, there's nothing better than ripping groomers in the morning, like before everybody gets there, and you get a couple laps of just fresh corduroy, that's awesome. And I love that. And I think it's amazing too. It's, backcountry skiing's awesome in the morning, but, ripping corduroy is not bad too. And a lot of fun. And it's a good technique play and something that you can do to practice technique. And I think that's really important. So quick recap on the skis. If you're in the olden days, not vintage is more like I'm skiing 210s. It's like 60 millimeters underfoot. You know what I'm talking about. I'm talking, but like this gentleman that I gave the example of, like the early K2 Telemark stuff. at least if you're looking to bump the skis up, go with something like I'm talking about. Early rise tip, traditional camber, a little tail rise, and let's rock and roll. Let's get you into that zone, getting you feel comfortable, and then you can kind of add to the quiver from there. And then, like I said, if you're intermediate expert skier, maybe you want to start getting into something a little more slarvy and a little more carvy. So slarvy and carvy. And I think that's a good spot to end. So I hope you enjoyed listening today, going over some of these upgrades and ideas for gear setups. Big shout out to Rory for sending that question in. I thought that was a fun one to tackle, and hopefully that got the wheels turning in your world as well. And just good to be here. Always love doing the podcast. Make sure to stay in touch with us over by signing up for our mailing list in the show notes. Those are going out a couple times a week, usually start of the week, end of the week. Keeps you in the mix with new arrivals. Like this week, we just had some new snapbacks pop in. There's a really cool camo one that has the Unity Tracks logo on it that I am absolutely rocking this week, and I'm super pumped about it. Lots of cool new merchandise. We got some really cool stuff coming down. One of them, I'll give you a little podcast listener deep cut, is we have acquired the awesome Telly Stomp logo from the Lake Superior Authority gentlemen out in the Midwest. And I'm super pumped because it's one of those designs that they, when they put it out, I was like, damn, that's a cool design. I wish I would have thought of that. And they approached us about us taking it over so we could produce it more. And we've got a nice little Freeheel Life version of it coming out. So keep your eyes peeled to the website and social media and the mailing list. That's why I was talking about it, because I don't want you to miss it, because when those drop, they're going to be hot, and they're going to go quick. So be sure to check out that new Telly Stomp logo as it comes out. You can find me at Josh Nomadson on Instagram, Facebook, and also I'll be doing a lot of these YouTube videos along with the rest of the crew, and super excited about that. So be sure to like and subscribe over on the YouTube channel, and hit me up at podcast@freeheellife.com this week. Let me know. Did you like this one? I don't know. Did you like it? Hit me up, podcast@freeheellife.com. Let me know. And until next week, brothers and sisters of the most fantastic, the most rad, the deepest, the most excellent turn on planet Earth and in the entire universe, spread Telemark always, my friends. Peace out.